Awesome. Welcome, welcome. So we are so excited this evening, and we'll begin by lighting the chalice. Oh my gosh, I brought the pieces, but not the part to light the match. I'm gonna go grab that because the toddler can't touch that. I'll be right back. One moment. Okay, perfect. Okay, lighting the chalice. Lovely. Okay. To light the chalice this evening, I have words from Maureen Killeron and also our featured author, Kim Green. So first, a poem titled Winds of Change by Maureen Killeron. As we weather winds of change, may we have wisdom to cherish moments of stillness. As we recollect times of challenge and of pain, may we remember also the graceful blessings of our lives. As we look to future unknowns, may we have the boldness to trust that there is unimagined good yet to come. I'm also offering a definition from the dictionary of the word vicissitude. Vicissitude means the quality or state of being changeable, a natural change visible in nature or in human affairs. And this is actually the epilogue from the book that we're discussing this evening by Kim Green. And the epilogue reads, "There are no accidents, no coincidences or chance meetings. There are only small tremors in the earth that remind us that we are alive. Only when the seismic shifts seem to deceive us, we question the solid ground on which we stand. When we dig deeper into the cracks below, we see that the only thing that holds us together, keeps us standing, keeps us fighting, are the vicissitudes." With that, I will welcome our featured author, Kim Green, one of our own UUCA congregants, who has actually changed her address to across the country. And this is a really exciting evening. This evening, we'll be discussing Kim Green's book, Vicissitudes, and it's an incredible novel about an unconventional tale that speaks to shifting currents of cultural acceptance and to the unprecedented time in which we are living. A big thank you to Dr. Chris Martin, also on our ARE team, adult RE team, for interviewing Kim Green this evening. If you don't already have your copy, our local bookstore, Karis Books, carries the book and is a great place to order it. And I'd like to share with you the trailer. There's a quick video trailer about the book. And just before I play the trailer, I will read a little bio about Kim Green. Kim Green was the ghostwriter for R&B superstar Fantasia Barrino. Barrino's Life is Not a Fairy Tale made the bestseller list of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Life is Not a Fairy Tale was also made into a Lifetime television movie directed by Debbie Allen. Kim's first novel, Hallucination, received an honorable mention from Writer's Digest magazine. She is also an award-winning copywriter and blogger. Ms. Green owns and operates Words LLC, a creative words studio, and Blank Page Consulting, where she coaches writers and their lives. Vicissitudes explores the intricacies and complications of being human. The novel challenges readers to expand traditional ways of thinking about love, sex, and romance. Kim lives between Atlanta, Georgia, and Tucson, Arizona, with her spouse, son, and dog, Mix. Lovely. Okay, I am sharing my screen to play the trailer. Click, 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 click. All right. Oh, let me try again. I did not click all the buttons so you can hear it. It's important that you hear the trailer. Okay. Now All right, I will let Chris Martin and Kim Green take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I'd like to start by talking about one of the goals of the book, which you said is to educate people. Tell me a bit more about why you thought about that goal and how you felt you fulfilled it when you were writing the book.
Well, I think it was important to write. I always like writing about things that nobody else writes about. That's the first thing. I just like to open people's minds in places that they'd never tried. And I think what I love about Vicissitudes, not to brag, but I really appreciate that it has a lot of facts in it, has a lot of like scientific facts of the trans experience, lived experience. And I think that when I look at transphobia, homophobia, even racism, you know, what's on the other side of that is fear. We are afraid of these things that we're not familiar with. And so I think it was so important that there was a trans character, because I didn't want just a book with a trans character. I wanted a trans character who had a voice and who could tell his story on his own terms. So he felt it was important that you understand this injections of testosterone, how much, how often, what it feels like, what it means to be a trans person in transition in the middle. And so how do you date? How do you find love when your body is in this transition state? So I think it was important to me to really create an educational world, but also an entertaining world that you kind of look at the characters and see all of the ways that we are as human beings. We get rageful, we get angry, we get jealous, we get lustful. I mean, we have all of these things. And I in the middle of this character who's in transition. So I just thought it was an important way to tell the trans story without disrespecting it, of course, and also to give it the light that it deserves. So I just thought I wanted to be entertaining and educational.
Right. And you've also said that it's not a genre book, it's a mainstream book. And
yes.
It's about the theme of loss. So, and it is, parts of the book are quite painful. So tell me a bit more about how you try to humanize loss.
Well, I think the Bethany character, people who have read the book are familiar with Bethany. A lot of people say that that's their favorite character. And because she really symbolizes what it is to be involved with a trans person and the loss piece, because we have sort of two ways of looking at it. It's always, oh, you know, viva la trans, no problem. And then there's the people who are like, I hate it, I don't want to think about it. And then there's this other piece, which are the people who are dealing with it, like it's in their life no matter what. And there's loss. I mean, there is loss. There is loss of the person that was. And because the trans lived experience is very much about moving forward and not looking backwards, there's this piece of them that says, you know, oh, forget my dead name, forget my past. But then there's parents and grandparents and lovers who were a part of that dead life and that dead experience. And so that's a painful thing. It's a very big deal. And I learned about that from having the privilege of interviewing a mother who had a trans kid. And they talked to me about the first time she ever heard the trans person's new voicemail. And it was no longer the voice that she had raised. And she talked about this story, and she told me when she listened to it, she hung up the phone or put the phone down and wept. And so that story happened to her about 10 years after she and I had the interview. And then she cried again about it 10 years later. So that was so moving to me, how raw this experience is and how it's still at the tip of somebody's heart. And it still made her cry 10 years later. So I think the loss piece is huge. And so I think so the themes, there are several themes, but obviously love, but loss and mourning and really grappling with change. And so those are the sort of the three big things, like grappling, trying to really ingest what's happening. And I think it's really timely right now because the world is trying to ingest all the changes that are happening in our society. So I just thought that that was what the loss piece is really about, Bethany dealing with John and his transition.
So I'm curious about, when you were doing research for the book, you probably saw various types of, well, with various ways in which people dealt with loss, and you had to choose one way for John because he's one character. But did you find any other interesting variation in how people cope with loss?
Well, then there's Renee. So the Renee character loses her mother in the book, and she has this big reaction to her mother's loss. And I don't really talk about it because I want people to read it, because it's really a very egregious thing that happens. And the reason for that, when I talk about it in other settings, when we're talking much more about in a more an LGBT setting, that egregious act that takes place has to do with the pain that she suffered with her mother being homophobic. And so as a vengeful act, she did something that was pretty egregious. But I think, so that's another way of dealing with loss. I mean, she dealt with the loss of her mother in a way that had revenge in it. And then, Bethany, hers is so hysterical. And it's so obvious to me that it's so much love behind it, all the anger, that there's a lot of love in that too. So, we all deal with loss in so many different ways, but then there's, little Rain, who doesn't have a father figure in her life. And then she takes on John in such a just hungry, ravenous way. So it's just a lot of different ways that people work around loss. And as a child, an innocent, she just goes for anything that looks like a father, so I think we all find ourselves hungering in different ways when there's loss.
You also brought the theme of Christianity in there, speaking of the mother dies. So did you want to incorporate Christianity, some elements of conservative Christianity in the book from the beginning?
I did. And what's interesting is that in Hallucination, which is my first book, there is a whole thing about that too. And that is a very personal piece of my experience. And so as an African-American person who grows up in, mainly Christian households, and then, many then become gay or trans or whatever. And it's always like a funny thing because they grew up going to church every single Sunday and being told that that's the worst thing that you can be. It's the devil's work. It's all these things. And so I think that hypocrisy is so huge. And because I love the irony of human beings, I just find it to be really fun. And so I think that a person who's gone to Christian churches their whole life, and you go and see the choir director who's practically wearing a dress, and everybody is like, he's straight, he's getting married to the girl in the pew. To me, that's always been so funny. And I grew up with that, just watching that complete way of being and seeing it all play out in modern days. Like right now, we have ministers who are doing all of this preaching against gay people, and they're gay, they're caught gay. So it's just kind of funny. So I tend to poke a little fun at that Christian thing. And, but I think it was important that, because every good book, wraps it up. So even Bertha, who's a character who is deceased, but has caused a lot of pain for Renee, even she kind of comes around, the spirit of her comes around. So I want the book to have an uplift moment for all the characters and for everyone to kind of figure out the vicissitudes of their life and try to transform. And at the cover of the book, it says, "Love transforms." which I think is a very important thought. Like everything we do changes us. And I really want people to see themselves in these characters and see the situations that are being presented and see how they can transform, because love transforms.
I think one thing that maybe UUs can relate to in terms of breaking with Christianity as well, I think a lot of UUs go through this experience when they, not that all UUs are agnostic or atheist, but many are. And so they do, at some point in their life, there often is some sort of break with a tradition. So I was raised Catholic, and I didn't immediately go from Catholic to UU, but I experienced that difficulty of telling my parents that I was an atheist, because that's also
That's
supposed to be a terrible thing if you're a Catholic.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. Yeah.
So it's a common experience in some form, I think, in the UU church. So you also have 4 major characters in the book, and there were some characters that you thought about developing further and giving them a bigger role, and then you revised the book a little. So tell me a bit about the characters. We can talk about this without talking about spoilers, because these characters have totally changed now. Tell me a bit about the characters that you've that changed from the first draft of the book to the published draft.
Well, I think there was a couple major things that happened in the book. And what I always find to be interesting about writing a book about the trans experience is that it changes every single day. So I spent about 4 to 5 years working on this book. So I would have like a big theme and a big like idea, and then you open the newspaper and it's like, oh, that's no longer the law, or that law has changed, or, you know, this trans person has a TV show, like that idea of their, you know, invisible is gone. So it was like a moving train that I was always trying to keep up with. And at certain places, I have to say, well, this is how it was, and so that's how it's going to be in the book. But I tried to keep up with it. So that's one piece. And then the other thing is, in terms of characters, there was a character that was a young person. So John is a high school coach. So he's dealing with kids all around. And so he works in an inner city school. And so, you know, I did something that was against my own better judgment, but which I reached lazily. I will say lazily. I reached for like a stereotypical tropey role. So I got a young Black man who got a girl pregnant, and that was going to be a whole thing. So that went on, and I wrote the whole book, and it was done. And then I just was like, that thing still doesn't mean anything, really. You know, like, who cares? That's normal stuff, and it's a bit of a trope, and it's a stereotype, and I hate to write about stereotypical things for African-American people. So I was like, I want to have a teenage trans person, because that is happening, and that is real, and there's some empathy around trans kids, because that is significant. And they're such a wonderful generation, because young trans people have a very different viewpoint of themselves than older trans people, which I find to be interesting. And, you know, when I talk to my trans circles, they explain all this to me. And so that African-American kid who was part of the book all the way around got taken out, rewritten. And then the new character is Teague, who's a teenager, like a 14, 15-year-old trans kid. And he has a huge impact on John. And I won't tell anymore, but he transforms John. So, you know, John is the big major character. And then this teenager changes his viewpoint of his own stealth and his own need for secrecy, because young trans people are out and proud and loud, you know. And I think that is so powerful when you grow up, even as a gay person, you know, the same thing is like, oh, I'm so nervous about it. But this generation of the LGBT people are out there, and it's really powerful. So I wanted John to tussle with those ideas that Teague was creating for him. And that made the book much more now than the other one. The other scenario was like a trope and also old, old school. This made sense. So
Yeah, you did mention, you mentioned that you're working on a sequel. Do you think some of John's students will feature in that?
I think so. I was thinking about it the other day in the closet. These ideas writing come up at odd times. And I was kind of thinking about what I would do with the students, because there will be more students. And they have such a different, that's a whole new avenue we will take on that, because young people are very different.
Right. And you also said that when you were doing this research on young people, you did a lot of research on YouTube, both US YouTube and British YouTube. So tell me a bit about some of the channels and what you learned about the trans experience from that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I did a lot of reading. So I'm a Unitarian. So of course I just looked up every book that exists on trans and read it. So that was easy. But of course, there's with the history, it's just like, the book about Harvey Milk, there's such a long history of trans experience that we know about it a little bit, but we really have no idea how long it's existed. And so I read a lot of those books, but there's so many new things. As I said, it's a moving train. So I was like, what is going on now today? What are people experiencing? Because I think 50 years ago, it was getting the surgery, and people were like living and dying around the surgery, have to have the surgery, have the surgery. So the new world of trans is that new young trans people don't believe they need to have the surgery. So that is a huge change. They're not living and dying for it. They're not saving money for it, not interested, like don't think it's necessary. So that I think is really significant. So that has been a huge thing about the differences in the generations. The generational differences in trans people have been very, very significant and a huge thing, a learning thing in terms of, so that's how I got to YouTube. So YouTube has 1 million, there's so many, it's unbelievable. People who are trans all over the world who are making videos of their transformations. And they literally get on and they say, okay, this is me 6 weeks on T. And then the next month, here I am, 7 months on T. And so you see, the beard coming, and you see the cheekbones changing and the body's changing. And then you're watching this and you're really you get very involved in it, especially if you're writing a book. So these characters start to come into my dreams. I'm dreaming about these trans men who are in transition. So what I learned, so I thought it was just me, that I found this secret place, that it was just me. And then I kept hearing that is a huge medium for trans people. It's a way that they can visualize what's going to happen to them. It's a way to have community. It's a way for them to express what's going on, especially if they have families or not with it, but they know it's important to them and they want people to see it and they're proud of it. There's a lot of joy and elation on those videos. So there were many of them. And then there was a couple that I got just very involved with, because one of them is British and he was getting married to like his old sweetheart. And it's just really poignant, like beautiful stories. But I found that to be such a great way to make John come alive, because I watched the physicality of the guys that are on there. And there was also like a sitcom, like a TV show called The Brothers. And that's a full trans drama that's on YouTube. And so I used to watch that. And I spent many, many months having visits and visiting with people who gave me their homes. Joy Bora is one of those people who let me write in her house for 2 weeks. And so I would, in those times when I was completely alone, I would stay up all night watching those videos and taking notes. But it was just hugely helpful to me. So I really thought that that was an interesting place to look instead of the encyclopedia. I mean, that was so
Right.
good for the research.
So is it
really
mostly young people making these videos, or is it people from various generations?
It was all young people. I will say that it was all young people. And I think the generation before of trans people, they were writing books and writing memoirs and things like that. And there's so many great ones. But this generation is obviously very visual. It's all about the way you look and also be able to show the drama of one's life. I mean, that's like the YouTube, Facebook phenomenon, like the drama of one's own life. And people find their own celebrity in doing it. And I think that that is a really interesting place to do. I mean, because as a person of my age, I'm so into privacy. I mean, everybody just really wants privacy. And this generation does not care about privacy at all. So they're
Yeah, I had a student 2 or 3 years ago who said, well, he asked me what was life like before social media and the web, because he said, I've never lived without it. And so I think if you were born before 1990, or even before 1995, you probably remember some period without YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. But
I remember it, and I remember it and miss it.
I miss it sometimes too.
I'm missing it very much. And that's the other interesting thing about, like, so I'm promoting a book in a pandemic, so I can't go out and meet the people, talk to them, do any of that, which is a huge part of, my marketing ways. And the other thing is that not only do I have to do that, but it's also about the followers you have. So I'm a person who doesn't want followers. I'm minding my own business. And in a marketing world, people are like, how many followers do you have? And it's like, really? I don't have any, like, because I'm not trying to get any, but it's just the world has changed. And I have another friend who's an entrepreneur, and she's putting out a product, and she tried to do it without too much money. So she was like, I'm going to talk to all the bloggers who do what my product is good for. And she would contact the bloggers. And this is a difference from 5 years ago till now. And so she would contact the bloggers and be like, look at my product. I'll send you free ones where you look at the product. And they would send back a price sheet. A price sheet. This is the cost for me to look at your product. So the world has changed. We are in a
It has definitely changed. Yeah. I was listening to a news comedy show, and they were talking about the Queen of England gave a speech last week. I think somewhat related to Brexit. Anyway, but there was a young person on the show joking that he sort of expected the Queen to end the speech with, "Don't forget to like and subscribe."
That's right. It's
a
very different time.
Yeah. So apart from YouTube, what other research processes did you have? Because it took you 5 years to write the book. So what else did you do?
I read and read and read and read. Then I interviewed people who had experience with trans people. I would go to the Atlanta film festival, the gay film festival, and I would go to a lot of the trans films. I would just do that. And then another thing that I do that very few people do is that, well, you should do it, but it's hard to do if you're introverted. I would go up to people. So I was at the trans festival once, and there was a guy there who was just emceeing it and sort of welcoming people and explaining. And so I sort of stalked him through the whole time because I didn't want him to get away from me. And then he left, and I was like, no. So I went running down the street, and I was like, can I talk to you? I'm writing a book. And I would love to talk to you. So he and I have become friends, and now he has a foundation called I Am Human Foundation. And so he and I interviewed, we sat on the phone for hours, and he told me all the stories of his life. And then of course I had Mr. Barb Grieve. I mean, I am a UU, and I was so blessed to have this community of people who not only are, like Hildegard shared something that's in her own personal life. And so I think I'm in the right place for people who have all these broad experiences. And the other thing that I did was I tried to do this sort of typical research thing, which is like, look up trans things and then make a phone call. And the thing about the trans community, which I found to be really moving and interesting, is that it's not a very open, embracing community. So because of the terrible danger that trans people experience and the hatred and the transphobia, they're not very open and welcoming. So people were not like, oh, you're writing a book, let's do it. People were just like, will not respond. Like they just would not respond when I would leave messages and things like that. And then there was one trans psychologist who I contacted, and she agreed to have lunch with me. So I went out to lunch with her, and I have to tell you, people who know me know that I'm very friendly and I'm very warm and smiley. And so I went out to lunch with this trans woman, and first of all, she was not a trans woman. She was just a cis woman married to a heterosexual cis male. But she sat me down and told me that, trans people are very closed. And, I asked her if I could come to their support meeting. And she said, no, absolutely not. They would never allow it. And she's, a cis woman sitting there, and she's the expert. And then I talked to her about my book and all that stuff. And she said, all the ideas that I told her about, she said they were all terrible ideas. And that I could not meet, and I could not come to the support group. And it was just really interesting. And I was very, very discouraged by that at that point in the process. And then I just realized that because this is a novel and this is fiction, quote unquote, and even though my mission is to create advocacy and allies, I still knew that I could I could make my own choices. And I no longer was going to go out following trans people and being, stalky, because that's how they feel. So I just really dug into my own ways, me and YouTube up all night, and using my own imagination and using my own experience of transformation for myself. I mean, I think we all transform. We're all in transition. We are transitioning to what we want to be. And so I know what that is. I know who I was when I was a heterosexual woman. I know that now I'm married to a female. I know the transition that I went through. And it's all about knowing who I am, knowing how the world sees me, and coming to terms with that. And so I think that is what John is going through. That is what Bethany is going through. I mean, in all their own ways, they're all transitioning to something that they want to be. Even Rain, who wants to be a grown-up, a strong woman, she's wrestling with that, with a mother who's stifling her and suffocating her all the time, protecting her. So I think the book took flight when I stopped chasing trans people, because that wasn't helping me. And it was making me discouraged, but in my heart, I knew a book like this had to come out. It had to tell the truth. It had to let a trans character tell his own truth in his own terms. Because there are books, Tom Peralta wrote that book, Mrs. Fletcher. And so all my friends were calling me and saying, oh, you've got to read Mrs. Fletcher. It's a book with a trans person in it. So I dropped everything, ran to get it. It was delivered next day. I was like, here we go. I read it in 2 days. And so there is a trans character, but the trans character has no transness about it. It's just something that all the other characters get to talk about. Oh, he's trans. So, I mean, that doesn't serve us as a nation as we're trying to open the doors and embrace. We have to really get to know people and understand people. And that's kind of what I was trying to do. Mm-hmm. That's a long answer for a short question, but I'm sorry.
Well, it's fine. That actually makes me think of something. Did you find, when you were doing this research, so part of the book, I guess not enough of the book is set in Atlanta, but some of it's set in Atlanta.
Yes.
Um, and some is set in LA. Did you find any cultural differences between those two cities when you were doing research?
Well, the Atlanta part, I live here, so I was writing from my heart and what I know. And the LA part, it's interesting because that all of that was about the glamour part. So Renee and Bethany are wealthy and they're in Hollywood and all of that stuff. So LA was sort of an accoutrement, really, because, and then of course it made John, who's living in a basement, that was just creating more distance between the experience of people who live in LA. But I could have gone much further in the trans scene in Atlanta, in LA, but I just wanted to stick really to the characters. And I wanted Atlanta to be the focal part because that's where Morgan is from. And so her experience there was important to me in the way that how green it is and how beautiful Atlanta is. I just wanted that to be highlighted, and sort of the LA part, the flashy part, the restaurants, all that stuff is very much, to me, when I go to LA, that is what it is. It's just glam and glitz and Hollywood. And so I wanted, Bethany and Renee to kind of live in that. And also it informed who they were as lesbian women. And John was always a little resentful of their success, by the way.
Right.
So all that was a little socioeconomic scramble there too. So it touched on a lot of things.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to talk about was the press. Transgress Press published the book. How did you find them and what else do they do?
Well, I'll tell you one very important thing. So I have another good friend of mine who, her name is Jen Sincero, and she wrote that book, You Are a Badass. And so she's a millionaire now, by the way. So, and so Jen, one of her first books was a book called The Straight Girl's Guide to Picking Up Chicks. And so she wrote this whole book about like being heterosexual, but like being a lesbian, but just sort of as a hobby or something. It was kind of weird, but anyway, that's my friend. So she wrote the book and she would go on book tours. And so she told me, and this is when I hadn't written a book yet. And so I was asking her about it. And she told me the story of going to a lesbian thing. And all of the lesbians were standing up and being like, how dare you write this book? You're not a lesbian. Like, just, it was like all of this major problems. So that stuck with me for years, decades. I was like, oh, I'm so scared. So I wrote this book and then I was proud of it and happy. And then I was like, oh, the trans people are going to kill me. Like, I'm going to go to an event and they're going to kill me. So I was very, very worried about it. So I want you to know that I, worked through an agent and did all the New York stuff. And people, all the editors were writing these wonderful things. Like, we're going back to my agent being like, it's beautifully written and blah, 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 but we can't do an LGBT book at this point or whatever. So I had the other thing in my process, I had 2 trans editors who helped me with the book. So, because I was ready for the trans people who were going to kill me. I was ready for them to be like, I had 2 trans editors who helped me. So I was very good friends with them. They were very lovely people. And one of them, at the end, when nothing had happened with the book yet, said to me, I said, but you know what? I'm going to just self-publish it. I'm good. I'm going to self-publish it. No problem. And I had contacted the self-publisher. I had gotten my quote for what the price was for the book, all that, ready to go, ready to write my check, ready. And my friend said, why don't you send it to Transgress Press, which is run by trans people? And I said, I'm scared because they're going to read it and yell at me and, I'm not trans. And they said, just send it. So I said, okay. But meantime, I was working on my self-publishing thing. And right before I was going to send the check, I'm telling you, my email came in from the trans guy and he was like, I love your book. and I want to publish it. And I was like, what? I don't even understand that. And then we talked a lot, and he called me and we had a long talk, and he was just like, I'm so amazed and mind boggled that you understand the experience and that you wrote this so authentically and so real. And so to me, that is sort of my greatest prize of this whole process, just that I got it right, that I felt it right. You know what I mean? And as a writer, it's so important to like feel my characters and understand them. And so to me, that was the big victory, that a trans press wanted to have my book on their roster. And I am, not trans. So it's possible. You can love and feel deeply enough to connect.
I will say the two main characters, Morgan and John, I did think were just very relatable.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Good.
it's almost like they were real people.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to do now, before I open it up to questions and answers, I want to drop the link for Transgress Press in the chat in case anyone is interested in seeing what else they've published. And it's something I thought I would share. It's in an interview with a youth gender clinician. So if you're interested in youth and transgender counseling and issues around that and what clinicians do, this is a podcast and the host is a friend of mine, and it was very educational for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I would share that as well. I'll put that in the chat. So what I'll do now is open it up to questions and answers. And for now, I'll keep the spotlight on the two of us, but Hildegard, your hand is up, so.
Okay, yeah, I have a curiosity question. So you took 5 years to think about this. So just out of curiosity, it's a love story. So you could have had a trans male or you could have had a trans female. You chose a trans male. Did you think that would be easier to write about, or was there some reason why you chose that?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, because I've written Hallucination, which is this, so Vicissitudes is sort of a continuation of this hallucination story, but they both, live on their own. Like you cannot read one or the other one, but they do kind of go together. But Morgan is a character that I had already developed. And so Morgan is a character very closely based on me. Like she's me, a single mom, has lupus, blah, blah, all this. So when I was thinking about the next book, I really wanted, because people responded so well to the characters from the first book. So I just had people loving the characters, but the storyline and all that was new. And so I wanted to get a love interest for Morgan. And so that's why it had to be a trans man at that point. But what I will say to you is, I think you are almost done with the book. And there is a little story that's in the book that talks about a trans woman that Morgan had experienced. I don't know if you got there yet.
No, I haven't.
So that is I'm thinking of having a trans woman main character in the next book, because that journey is also so different. It's so different because and I'm no expert, but I will just say that I know that the transition from male to female is much harder because of the physicality reasons. And so, there's a million like beautiful trans men, and because they're they're just able to like make that transition much easier. I think that for the men to turn into women, it's much harder, and they battle with a lot more. I mean, the transphobia in that area is huge too. So it's something that I want to dig into. And one of the books that I've read from Transgress Press is a book called Letters to My Sisters. And it's a book of trans women just writing about their experience. And talking about, men who say, I have a wife and children and all of that, and I'm 50 years old and now I'm a woman, I mean, it's just heartbreaking. And not heartbreaking for the reason that it sounds, but just because it's so poignant, the struggle, the struggle of that particular vicissitudes journey. So I will explore that later because I think it's really, really moving to me. But I had to get Morgan a man.
Got it.
To answer your question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have also read, or heard, it was actually in the interview I just shared, that because in society, on average, women have less status than men, one of the things you have to deal with if you're transitioning from male to female is a loss of status, whereas if you transition the other way, you have a gain in status. So that's also a difference.
Well, what's interesting about that, you have a change in status going from female to male, but you also, when you're female and go into being Black male, you have double loss of status. So that's a really interesting piece too. So I think that John goes through that, and then John, of course, is biracial. So he has all these different pieces of himself. So his intersectionality is pretty deep, because he is a biracial Black man now. So interesting, but that is a good point. Yeah.
So Elizabeth, you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to ask, I love hearing more about the process. I loved the book. Oh my gosh. And this is coming, as I put in my review, this is coming from a breastfeeding mom who really needs sleep and doesn't want to wake up in the middle of the night. But when Gwendolyn woke me up to eat, I got to read more of the book, and it was marvelous. So I went through the book quite quickly. And I love hearing more of your process. My question is, so you had, the surprise moment and transgress breast before, but so after it's published, after it's out there, what's the most unexpected or surprising thing that has happened since that point in the journey?
Well, I would say that I'm telling you that Transgress Press is the biggest, still most exciting thing. But I think that people are really loving it, and they're really saying how educational it is, and that they just had never thought of it or never cared about it or had like an advocacy feeling about it. So I think that is it's the most surprising and the most sort of what I expected, what I wanted, what I hoped for, that people would be educated by it. And, when you kind of put something out there, you just have no idea. And I just love that people really were like, oh my God. And the other interesting thing is I have a client who's a doctor, and he said to me, he's reading my book, he read it. And so he said to me, I want to ask you a question. And I said, what is the question? And he said, how did you get all that trans stuff? How did you put that in? How did you learn that? And I said, research. And he said, really? Like, he was so stunned. And I was like, I don't understand why you're so confused by that. But he was just like, it was so authentic and so right on that it just is shocking to me that you got it like that. Like, it's so right. So I think what I'm most proud of is that all those nights that I stayed up, for years, obsessing with this thing, that because I was caring, like all of that was me caring about it. And it was just so lovely that people kind of got it. That's the most surprising and most delightful thing about this process, that people really got it.
So exciting. Thank you.
That's a good question.
Okay, so Dandy has a question.
Dandy.
Hello.
Hi, Dandy.
I'm the one with the rainbow on.
I see you. I know you.
Hi, Kim. How are you?
Hi.
Yeah. So you mentioned that like a lot of people, like something that you wanted people to get out of this book was to learn about like the different communities that they may or may not belong to. And as a trans person, someone who like has done like all of this exploring of their own gender, how do you feel, or do you feel that the process of writing this book and the process of research, how do you feel that's like informed your own gender identity, if it has?
Oh, God, what a question. I love that question. I love that question because it is, like I mentioned before, my own intersectionality. So, I went from being a straight woman who's looking for a boyfriend, and now I'm married to a woman. So in the middle of all of that, I went through many things, and I had an experience with a trans person that was life altering, because I could see myself in all these stages. So I know that there's parts of me, even though I'm, a feminine woman, I have a very like big bossy personality. You know what I mean? So, there is a male piece of me, and I honor it. I think from writing the book and going through the process, I wanted to honor that part of me. And also the places where people say, I'm they, I'm all of it. I'm half of it. I'm a little bit, I love that, I love that. And so I think that I really explored my own sense of self and sexuality in writing the book. And I think that that was great. And then, when I look at Renee and like the Renee character, and she's this very strong, bossy woman, and she's got this sort of very feminine woman. So I just wanted to like put all of these characters and these types of relationships out there, for people to honor and to see and to have an eye in, because they were a fancy couple, but they still had their problems. They were still human. So I think that humanity is the biggest excitement that I got out of writing this book, but also the intersectionality of all of us, and this wanting to go from one place of my experience to another place. And I want everyone to look at that transformation that we all are going through. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Also, if you're still interested in watching trans-related YouTube content, my fiance is one of the only trans people on YouTube doing information for trans medical health.
Oh, beautiful.
And if anyone else is interested, he loves it when people like and subscribe his videos. So I can at least send that information if you'd like.
Yeah, please do. I would love to see it. Yay. I'd love to be a guest, by the way. So put it in there and I will look at it. Thank you for mentioning
Thank you.
That's great.
So Jim, you had a question?
Jim had a question.
Yeah.
Then he disappeared.
Unmuted here.
Oh, there he is. Okay, you're there. But now you're muted. You're muted.
You're muted again.
Okay.
Okay, I am not high tech here, but I'll get there. Okay. Question is about a minor character of yours in the book.
Okay.
Jax, the hip hop artist.
Okay, yeah, excellent.
You were not kind to him.
No.
No, he was a jerk, basically. And his entourage beat up Jean, showed the hatred and the black on black hatred or gay, whatever.
Good.
I don't. I was a little surprised that you were harsh on the hip hop, because you were.
I was a hip hop journalist, by the way.
Yes, yeah, I know that. That's why it surprised me. I know that. And that's why it surprised me that you were so harsh on that that part of society. I'm just curious about that.
I love that question. It's so good. Well, one thing you know about me, Jim Kelly, personally, is the best thing about me is I'm honest. And so this book has lots of honest things in there that are not perfect and friendly and warm and fuzzy, because I think that is no use in writing that. I think what I try to do is be a mirror. So I want people to like see themselves in the book. And so a hip hop artist, and I was in the music industry, that's all real. Everything I wrote is real. The pot room and record
Yeah.
executives who make room for the pot room, like all of the things that go on. I think that Mr. Greenstein character, the record exec who's like exploiting young Black men, all of that is all real. And I think it's honest, you know, and it's not meant to be harsh, but it's certainly meant to be realistic. And I think it was very important in the book is that John is a trans man, and he was faced with this manly machismo stuff that is going to be his nemesis for the rest of his life. This is the path that he chose, and so the violence that comes with it, the homophobia that comes with that, and then, you know, I am married to a Jamaican woman who's beautiful and perfect, but Jamaicans are really homophobic, and she will tell you. And we did another talk, and she was online, and somebody asked a question about Jax, and then I said, oh, you know, Jamaicans are homophobic, and Nordia, my wife, writes in, they are. So it's like, reality is my thing. So I appreciate that question, but I think it's important that people see that because it's cultural, you know, it's completely cultural. And so I think I want people to expand their cultural crutches. You know, we all have cultural crutches. It's like, oh, you know, I'm Black, we're really loud. And so, you know, that's my cultural crutch. So I don't have to be not loud because I'm told that I'm loud. I think that is just sort of that's not the best way forward for all of us if we're all going to coexist. So I think we want to look at the things that we were told that we're supposed to do because we're Jamaican or Irish, or, you know, I'm Irish, I drink a lot, you know, like, okay.
Oh, now come on now, don't get it.
Cultural crutch. Don't do it, you know, if you don't think that that's the way forward. So I like to explore those things, those little things, those niggling things that really can change people if they just see themselves on paper, you know.
Didn't that though play into the stereotype of hip hop artists all being violent, criminal thugs?
Well,
or is that my image?
Well, I think that's you because you're you. But I also think it's because, but I also think it's realistic. And so if you're gonna have like this scene in a record studio, that's what happens. You know, nobody comes in alone in their car. Nobody drives up in their Honda by themselves to record. It's always a room full of boys, all smoking pot and having fun. I mean, that's kind of what it is to be in the industry. So I loved it because I have a lot of friends in the music industry still, and hope they'll still be friends, but they will see that because, you know, I have a good friend who works in touring industry. And so that's totally her world, like studios and all of that. And we talk a lot about it and things like, you know, is it reasonable to make a special room for artists to come and smoke pot? Like in a business setting, like, is that reasonable? Yeah. So it's just a mirror. It just allows people to see all these different things that they don't necessarily know about. Okay. But love that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Kay has a question.
I have a comment first, and that is that I haven't read a lot of books about trans. I read the Bohemian one, which was years ago, about a man transing to a woman. But all of the references and all of the times that I read that, it's like very comforting to me in a way for all my teenage sexual exploration, to understand that there's a fluidity to us always.
Yes.
And it's very comforting to know, because when you're 75 years old, that was not a thing that it was even possible. Right. I mean, it was like out of the realm of anything. So it's like I've been really comforted over the years by the fact that there is a concept of sexual fluidity, especially in a young person's life, and that and it puts it into a context that's very nice for me. I also my question had to do with RuPaul's anger about transsexuals, and it's like, part of me thinks if you're liberal, you're liberal, but clearly there's a lot of lines. A lot of lines.
Well, and that is very much like Bethany. Bethany is a character in my book who's a lesbian, and she is furious about this transition. She's disgusted by it. So I think that there are so many lines, and I love that you mentioned that, because there are, within the gay community, there are people who are very angry at people who are stealth, people who don't, announce it the first minute they walk in the room. And so, I mean, there's just so many lines. There's so many lines, and we have to remember that we hold these lines so steadily because of our own fears. And so it's like, if I'm an out gay person and you're a subtle gay person who just doesn't even mention it, like most people don't even know, then that threatens my possibility for being here. So if everybody has to behave like you do, then that threatens my freedom. And so, and we can use that all the way to masks, whatever. So what we hold on to these freedoms that are really sort of artificial, because I think if we're standing in our humanity, we just want to be able to love however people are. And we can't be mad that you choose to be stealth and I choose not to be stealth. I mean, that is just such a small thread that doesn't make a difference either way. If gay people are going to be free, they're going to be free. And they don't have to behave the same way. But I think that is a very, I didn't know about RuPaul having this anger at transsexuals, but I can imagine that to be true. The lines are so, there's such chasms to our humanity, I think.
Well, I think you hit it, and that is it's a defensiveness. I mean,
yes,
it hits at your own vulnerabilities, and
right.
You just want to be angry.
Right, of course, yeah. And it's funny, I interviewed RuPaul early in my journalism career, and he was a handsome, beautiful man when he came into the interview. And now, it's funny because he's the RuPaul drag thing, he's, always in regalia. And then, but in the press, he's always like with his boyfriend, dressed as a man, handsome, so it's kind of interesting. It's like, then he's like turning on that persona that he has on TV. So it just is, it's complicated. All of this is very complicated, but the bottom line is that there's so much fear in who we are, in ourselves, like when we can just really stand in who we are, that we have to like lash out at anybody who threatens that. And so that might show up in my next book. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. These conversations are so good for me. I really love them, but that's a good point, Kay. Thank you for that. That's a good question.
Sarah had a question.
Yes, hello, this is Sarah.
How are you?
I'm doing well. I arrived a little bit late, but I so enjoyed this conversation. I so enjoyed the book. I found it so romantic and approachable, and enjoyed the characters so much. And yes, so sexy. It was,
good.
Good read. You relate to each of these characters, really. I had never read a book about trans and everything that somebody has to go through that process. And so that was really educational, and what I felt was all the right ways.
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell you, what has stayed with me, though, was the young trans speaking to him and saying, you have to help me, like this plea,
Right.
this call.
Yes.
And what I felt was kind of left, maybe possibly intentionally, I'm sure intentionally, was that call was kind of unsatisfied, that it's like a call to others to try to satisfy that.
Yes, yes, that's true. And I think I tried to wrap it up so that John and Teague's mother kind of got together and they did something with the school and all of that stuff. So it's also like, we don't want these lives to be in vain. So if we have to lose them. And then the other thing that's kind of controversial, that I felt was controversial, but nobody has mentioned it yet, is the conversation about, suicide. And that's a very, I mean, that's tricky. I typed with my eyes closed on that one. But I think that's a conversation that I always want to further, like this idea of, oh, mental health. It's mental illness that does that. It's mental illness that does that. And then it's like, look at the world that we're living in. Maybe there's a sense of sanity that says, I don't want to do this. I choose not. I decline. And so I think that was something that I kind of sprinkled in, and I will probably sprinkle in it further because I feel really strongly about it, because I know the world is so crazy and so difficult in so many ways. And I think but Teague was such a valuable person for John. I mean, he changed John's whole trajectory. So I think even the small people and the small pieces, the small characters can be very big. And so Teague is a small character and he has a huge influence on the whole outcome of the book. So it's really pretty interesting. And I must tell you that please write a review on Amazon. I really appreciate it. Doing a book in a pandemic is impossible. So thank you.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions? Jim, you had another question? Jim, you're on mute again.
Okay, is that better?
Yep.
I really appreciate like the way you showed the pain from both sides, the pain that it caused to Bethany. Okay, we're confused here. When John was a woman.
Right, yep.
And they moved on. Oh, that was very, very powerful way to show that. I don't appreciate you doing that, because a lot of books, it's all like you did before, it's all pro, promotion. So I just wanted to comment on that. That was just really, I thought, an honest thing.
Oh, good. Good. Thank you.
That's just it. That's just all I wanted to say. I'm sorry. That's it.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And write the review on Amazon. I did it. They took it. And it's not that hard.
Please write them. That helps. It helps.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out, though. Yeah.
Sure. No problem.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Dandy wrote a very nice note on there. Can I share that, Dandy? She there? She gone?
Yes, my pronouns are they, them. But yeah, go ahead.
I can share what you wrote?
Yes, please.
Okay, she said, as a trans person, I can definitely say sometimes suicide feels like a real solution. Thank you for sharing that, Kim. So, obviously, whenever you mention suicide in the new world, there's a phone number that comes up. And so like somebody should write like the suicide hotline, but because it's such a serious thing, but I guess I just really have always wanted to toy with this idea of people choosing not to exist in this society, in this world that we've created. So I loved that Dandy mentioned that, because that is sometimes seems like a solution when every door is closed. And when you have trans people who cannot get an apartment, they just, even if they have money, they can't get an apartment just because of judgment. That is just strict judgment. I don't like that you are a man and you were wearing a dress. I don't like that. So you cannot live here. So, I mean, we have a long way to go to make a world that's reasonable for all of us. So I just know that that is powerful. And I know that the character Teague, who has this experience, I don't like it when people say, oh, that's just mental illness. I mean, that is just too easy. It's too easy. We should look at why people don't want to be here. And that is sort of what I'm getting at. So thank you for bringing that up, Dan.
There's a psychological theory that says one reason people do die by suicide is when they feel like they want to have a sense of control when everything else is not under their control. So people who are in situations where they feel like they have very little control.
And that is a control, that's a moment of control. Yeah.
Right. So Nancy, go ahead.
Hi, Kim.
Hi,
you know, I just a quick comment. I guess I think this is the third conversation that I have sat in on about your book. And I would just encourage other people that when the opportunities arise, because the richness of the conversations is more ways to deepen and understand and become educated. And I've just loved every comment, because as I've read the book and then, you know, I'll have to go back and read after a conversation, I'll think, oh, shoot, I'm not sure, you know, I got to go back and read that again. You know, because the first time it was very educational. I read it very much as in learning. And then afterwards, realizing I really like these people. You know, that I was really resonating with those characters and interested in what's happening now. I wonder, you know, what's going on, and really, you know, because, you know, I found Bethany just supremely annoying.
Right.
You know, at first, and it took me a while to appreciate where she was coming from. And I think the first time that I really did was in one of the conversations where you had a dramatic presentation, somebody who was presenting that, and I could really see her pain, and then go back and read her with compassion and really begin to get in touch with the losses part. So, and then I appreciate very much what Kay said, because I think, you know, through this book and others, but it opens us all up to our own possibilities. And be we 72 or 75.
Right, yes.
And realize, wow, you know, and just have an open heart and maybe a little bit of envy to kids that are young now. And have that freedom to explore fully in their lives.
That's right.
Who they are and they're all of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Always. Kay has a question.
Yes, Kay has a question.
Through the whole last few years with the Black men being killed, it's clear that most people of my color and age have very little concept of the kind of harassment and fear that most of those men have gone through. And thinking about suicide and thinking about feeling really bad in context of your book, it just is very striking to me that you don't need to have a lifetime of being afraid of policemen or being afraid of people for some comment or some one person in your life that can just undo you by their disapproval.
Yes.
It doesn't take a lifetime of insults. It just takes a mother or a lover
Yeah.
or a teacher or somebody that's going to ask you to use every vicissitude you have.
Right, exactly. Yes, yes. Well, and the thing about that is that when you think about it like that, like what you just said is powerful, it gives us a sense of how powerful we are as individuals and how we impact each other. And so, maybe, that there's a t-shirt that I love and I wear all the time: in a world where you can be anything, be kind. I mean, it's a call to action. Somebody also wrote a wonderful thing. Sarah just wrote, the part of the plot line was, I thought, a call to action. It's a societal problem that compels people to not feel they fit in. We're the ones that are called to reach out and make change in this society. So this is really what the book hopes to do, that we all can see that we have the power to make a difference and make the world kinder. And every time we have judgment, fear of a Black man, fear of a trans person, fear of a woman, all these weird fears that we have just make our world so it closes in the walls. And then some people choose, I don't want to be here, it's too much. Because life shouldn't be so hard. It's gotten harder and harder. It's getting harder and harder, which is, I find to be so appalling, but it's just getting harder and harder. And I think we just have to, and Unitarians do this very well. We so much concentrate on who we're being. And that helps, makes such a difference. So I applaud the Unitarian philosophy of, these 7 principles and being those things for ourselves. It makes a big difference. And that, to me, being a Unitarian is the only way that I could say, I'm going to write this crazy book that everybody's like, what are you writing? What are you writing that for? I mean, even my lovely wife is like, why are you writing that? Why are you like staying up all night for 5 years? Like, what are you doing? But it's me saying, I want to care about this. I want to care all the way. I don't want to just sprinkle it in my book and say, see, I have a trans character. I'm very inclusive. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go deeper because it's so important that we make a world that welcomes everybody. And I just think that is the UU in me, by the way. So I'm grateful to have this community. Any other
Great.
questions?
Well, it looks like it's time for closing. So thank you, Kim. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Well, you guys are welcome. Thank you so much for having me and having this conversation, because every conversation to me is about transformation. So that's what we've come here to do. And thank you so much. And feel free to, if you haven't gotten the book, please get it at Transgress Press, or you can get it at Amazon, and you can also get it at Karis. So that's all the great places that you can get it.
Awesome. Well, it's such a big thank you. A big thank you to Hildegard for Zoom teching, to Kim and to Chris. Thanks to all of you for joining. And I just want to highlight that our semester is coming to a close soon. So you have 2 more chances for yoga. That's this Thursday and next Thursday at 10:30 a.m. before we take a break for the summer. And we have 1 more Tuesday class that's coming up next Tuesday on May 25th. It's titled, Is the World Getting Better? It's presented by our own Dr. Chris Martin, and there are lots of measured shifts and changes happening in our world that document that the world is getting better, yet most people do not know about these improvements. And the progress is neglected by both educational institutions and news media, particularly because sudden bad events garner more coverage than gradual good events. So in his talk, Dr. Chris Martin will describe what has improved over the recent past and some theories about why this has happened. So that's next Tuesday. Join us at 7:30 p.m. And Laura Beth, did you have any closing comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Kim, I've been here. I mean, I've been listening to this the whole time. I've been making dinner and all of those things. So it didn't want to be a distraction.
Hi, Laura Beth.
Hi, Kim. But thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts and just the background of the book. And I haven't got to read the book yet. It is on its way to me. But just
great.
You've got 5 stars everywhere. So just congratulations on that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about that.
Awesome. Thank you all. I will extinguish our chalice and have a lovely evening. Have a good one. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.